and the end of the war saw the most terrible weapon in human history unleashed on Japan, the necessity of which is debated to this day. This is the story of how a bloody war became bloodier and barely escaped turning into a cataclysmic apocalypse. I first visited Japan 19 years after the end of the war. The war was recent enough that its reminders were still easy to find, both in Japan and the other countries I visited that had experienced the bloodiest war in human history. I was fortunate that my sister had a pen pal in Japan. Yoshiko Tsuruta was my astral twin, born at the same time as me, who was now a student at Tokyo University of Education, now known as the University of Tsukuba. She was eager to meet a real American, and I was privileged to get an insight into the country and its people that most gaijin, foreigners, rarely experience, since her family shared her curiosity. The Japanese are intensely private people. They could not be otherwise in a country so densely populated, and even good friends rarely visit each other's homes before they have been friends for many years. I was invited to stay with Yoshiko and her family from the first time I arrived in the country, and during the 18 months I spent in the Far East, I used up most of my leave time making other such visits. While in their home, I followed the rule, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." I lived in the Japanese manner, sleeping on a tatami mat with a wooden block for a pillow, learning to use chopsticks, and even by the end successfully managing to adapt myself to the Japanese toilet, something few Westerners ever manage. By the time I returned home, I felt I had an understanding of the country and its people that was foreign to most of my fellow sailors. Over the course of these visits, the subject of the war came up early. On my first visit, I was taken to see the Mikasa, Admiral Togo's flagship at the Battle of Tsushima Strait that established Japan as a major power, there in her concrete dry dock outside the Yokosuka Naval Base. The ship is a monument to Imperial Japan, and more specifically to its Navy. To say I felt a bit strange visiting while wearing the uniform of the Navy that had defeated that Navy, a lone American among a throng of Japanese, would be an understatement. As I looked at the models of Imperial Navy warships that lined the bulkhead, I thought to myself, sunk at Guadalcanal, sunk at Midway, sunk at Philippine Sea, sunk at Leyte. I was even then a serious student of the Pacific War and had been for as long as I can remember. Afterwards, over lunch, Yoshiko asked me why we had fought the war. She proceeded to tell me the Japanese version of the history of the Pacific War. The two stories, American and Japanese, could not be more different if they had taken place on different planets. We ended up spending the afternoon in that tea house as I told her the American history of the war, including the history of the Japan-China War that preceded Pearl Harbor. She was shocked at what she heard, but to her credit she wanted to learn more. At her school, she eventually met Professor Saburo Yanaga, perhaps the most interesting Japanese academic historian of the war, author of The Pacific War, 1931 to 1945. Professor Yanaga first wrote about the war in 1947 in a work titled New Japanese History, which was the first to deal with Japanese war crimes. The work was censored in 1953 by the Japanese Ministry of Education for what was called factual errors and matters of opinion regarding those crimes. Yanaga sued the ministry for violation of his freedom of speech, with the result that The Pacific War was published in 1961. It was only translated into English and published in the United States to little notice in the 1980s. Yanaga was later nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999 and 2001 by Noam Chomsky, among others, for his work. Yoshiko read the book, and the war became a topic she and I discussed honestly, attempting to reconcile Japanese and American memory. She did not share that with her family or friends, since the topic was so shocking to Japanese sensibilities.